Now you're literally becoming somebody else. All of a sudden, you will leave this three-dimensional reality. And when you leave this three-dimensional reality, there's only one other place you go, and that's called the quantum field. Then I asked the fundamental question, has anybody else done it? So then I traveled to 17 different countries and interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people with serious health conditions that were treating either conventionally or unconventionally. They were staying the same or getting worse, and all of a sudden they got better. So what was the cause that produced the effect, you know? And the stories and what I learned was so amazing. I went back to school and studied neuroscience because mind was such a strong element. It wasn't diet, it wasn't celibacy, it wasn't any of those things. It was just really this element. And so then I was able to figure out that there were 4 common things. And then I wrote a book about it, and then I thought, God, if this works really on people that were sick and are better, and they come from all walks of life, all colors, all races, all genders, sexual preferences, but all of a sudden, I wanted to see if I was able to reproduce it. So then I started seeing, okay, let's see if we can teach this, be able to reproduce the outcome, because that's science, right? The first one was that they all believed and accepted that there was an intelligence that lived within them that was giving them life. And
these people you interviewed who had had injuries that overcame them?
No, these are people with cancer, MS, lupus, Parkinson's disease.
Who got better?
Yeah, just spontaneously, and it's called a spontaneous remission.
So they believed there was an intelligence.
There was some invisible life force that they were connected to, that they felt like they had lost their connection to. They became separate and disconnected from. And that when they got the diagnosis, they woke up and said, man, I got to connect again, and I got to connect to my essence. And so they developed a relationship with it, just like you develop a relationship with anybody. It takes time, you got to be present, you got to connect, you got to experience, you got to be present. All of these things are important elements. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that they realized that it was the mismanagement of their emotions and the hormones of stress that really began to create their condition. Now, stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. Stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis. We have an innate mechanism in our body that returns us back to order. So then if someone cuts you off on the LA freeway, you have an emotional reaction, but 15 minutes later you're back to driving and you're over it, right? That's all organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress.
But when it's all day long, all week, all year.
Yeah, so if you're reacting to, like if Tyrannosaurus Rex is chasing you, you have to make a decision. Am I going to use 20% of my energy or am I going to use 100%? So it turns out when you're reacting to traffic.
200%.
Oh, right, or if you're reacting to your coworker sitting in the cubicle next to you.
Right.
You're turning on that response, and what was once very adaptive becomes very maladaptive, because when you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease, because nobody can live in emergency mode for that extended period of time. Well, human beings, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. You can think about your problems, and you're producing the same biological effects. So those chemicals give the brain and body a rush of energy. And people become addicted to that rush of energy. So now they use the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion. They need the bad job. They need the poor relationship. So that means they become addicted to the life that they don't even like. Right?
Why do we need the bad job or bad relationship and stay stuck in those?
Because it's a conditioned response. So listen, if you get angry at a coworker and all of a sudden you get an arousal in your brain and body, right? You get a rush of energy. When you start noticing that your body starts dropping, your brain starts noticing your energy starts dropping, you're automatically going to have the image of the coworker in order to what? Give your body the next jolt, jolt, right? So all of a sudden people become addicted to their own thoughts, right? So these people realize that, oh my God, I've been mismanaging my attention and energy, and I gotta get beyond my past. I gotta get beyond these emotions. I gotta make some big changes. I gotta break the habit of being myself. You know, I gotta stop being this person. Now, that sounds really good theoretically and philosophically, but change is such a hard thing, right? Because the moment you come back to your senses and you step back into your life and you see that person, or you go to that place, or you're with that experience, so many people are unconsciously reacting in their thoughts and feelings to everything in their environment. So now their environment is controlling how they think and feel. So they realize that in order to change,
Got to change the environment.
they got to be greater than their environment, greater than the conditions in the world, greater than the circumstances.
Be mindful of that every time
Stay
it comes
conscious.
up. To be
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to
Yeah.
think differently.
Right.
I'm not going to react
Yeah,
this
right.
way.
I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to go back, because the moment you start reacting emotionally, emotions are a record of the past. And if those emotions are driving your thoughts, you're thinking in the past. And if you can't think greater than how you feel, and you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, you're creating more of your past, right? So it turns out that the repetition of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking, these loops that people get caught in, condition their body to subconsciously become the mind of that emotion. Which means now their body, as their unconscious mind, is believing they're living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. What's the relevance behind that? Well, the latest research on genes says genes don't create disease. It's the environment that signals the gene that creates disease.
The emotional environment or the physical environment?
Your environment, any environmental reaction. But if you're reacting emotionally to your environment the same way, you're signaling the same gene in the same way, and now you're headed for a genetic destiny. So the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease. If you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, your thoughts could make you sick. And if your thoughts can make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts can make you well? So they began to realize that, oh my God, the repetition of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking caused me to feel guilt, and I don't even know it's guilt, it just feels like me. It's just, I'm used to the same chemical continuity. Now, the moment they decided to change, anytime you decide to change and change anything about yourself, get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable.
It's going to hurt.
You're going to leave the known.
Yeah.
You're going to leave the familiar, and you're going to step into the unknown.
Even if the familiar is uncomfortable and painful,
Right.
it's still going to be painful leaving the pain.
Right, because some people are super happy being unhappy.
Right.
So then they would rather cling to their suffering than take a chance in possibility. So these people said, I really have nothing to lose, right? So then they said, I'm willing to be uncomfortable and be in the unknown, and it turns out that's the perfect place to create from. So when the body is conditioned to become the mind, then to change is to be greater than the body, right?
How do we become greater than the body?
Well, that's a whole nother conversation, but let me finish this,
Yes.
okay? So the third thing they said was, okay, so now that I know that I got to break the habit of being myself, and I can't mismanage my thoughts and feelings, I got to change how I act, I got to watch how I speak, I got to become conscious of how unconscious I am, because 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors, like a computer program, emotional reactions, unconscious beliefs and perceptions. So the first step to change is to become conscious of how you think, to notice how you act, to pay attention to how you feel. And the act of observing those states of mind and body separates you from that program. Now you're the consciousness observing that program. And it turns out the more conscious you become of how unconscious you are, lighting a match in a dark place, that first step creates enormous amounts of chaos in the brain and body. And it's disturbing, so people just go back to the same addiction, the same emotion, the same problem. Just feels better. No, that feels familiar. So they said, okay, now I got to change. I got to reinvent myself. Now this is really important, because they started sitting down and thinking, okay, who in history do I admire? Who are great people, role models that I could follow? What are the qualities and characteristics that they have? How am I going to change? These are what we call frontal lobe questions. The creative center of the brain switches on, and the emotional center settles down. So then they started thinking, how would I have to be in a new life if I was really going to heal? What would I have to change about myself? Now, there's this interesting phenomenon that if you close your eyes and you begin to think about doing something, you're an athlete, you understand this. If you're a background in football and you were running a pattern or you were doing something, you would rehearse it in your mind.
Yeah.
Turns out that the act of mentally rehearsing something when you're truly present, your brain does not know the difference between what's going on out there and what's going on in here. In fact, your brain will begin to look like you've been doing it for the last 5 days and you've never run the course. So now your brain is no longer a record of the past, because typically it is. Now it's a map to the future. So now you're priming your brain. So that became the very platform. Experiments with piano players. You take a group of people that never played the piano before, you divide them into two different categories. You take one group of people, you teach them one-handed scales and chords. You do a brain scan on them. They come and practice for 2 hours a day for 5 days. At the end of 5 days, if you rescan the brain, they grow new circuits on the opposite side of the brain. Nothing magical there. You learn something new. Learning's making new connections. Get some instruction. You get instruction, you get your body involved. You get your body involved, you're going to have an experience. Experience enriches the brain. Pay attention to what you're doing. You got to pay attention and repeat it. Firing and wiring. You're going to assemble new circuits. You can take the other group of people, have them come for 2 hours a day for 5 days, do a brain scan before, the brain scan after. Have them close their eyes and mentally rehearse playing those scales and chords. At the end of 5 days, they'll grow the same amount of circuits in their brain as the people who actually physically demonstrated the action. What does that mean? It means not only do they change their brain by thinking differently, but their brain looks like they've been playing the piano for 5 days. Now set them in front of a piano. Never played the piano before. They'll play those scales and chords because their brain is wired to play it. So now, the act of rehearsing who they're going to be, what are the qualities, and beginning to get in this creative state, began to lay down the circuits of a new personality. And a new personality is connected to a new personal reality. So the next question is, does that change the body? Take a group of men, have them do one-handed curls in their mind, and bring an emotional component like stronger, harder, more intense. 1 hour a day for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, 13.5 increase in muscle strength.
Wow.
Never lifted a weight. Now their body is changing by thought alone.
Huh.
So these people began to reprogram their brain and body. And all of a sudden, they began to act differently. Why? Because they installed the circuits. They began to think differently, of course. They began to feel differently. They were no longer feeling pain. They're actually liking themselves, right? So then if they're living by a different emotion, and they're feeling an elevated emotion before they're healing, before they were healed, they're not waiting for their healing to feel joy and gratitude. They're feeling gratitude and joy. Now their body's believing that it's healed because the body's feeling the emotion ahead of the experience. And if the environment signals the gene and the end product of an experience in the environment is emotion, you're signaling the gene ahead of the environment. And what do genes do? Genes make proteins. And what are proteins responsible? The structure and function of the body. Now you're literally becoming somebody else. And now you're turning down the genes for disease and you're turning up these other genes. So I started to realize that this reinvention process is exactly what we've always done. It's just that we get complacent in certain areas of our life and we stop. Now the last thing they had in common, the fourth thing, is that when they were doing that rehearsal process, they had long moments where they lost track of time and space. In other words, they were so involved in their inner world of imaging that when they turned the light on in the room or they lift their blindfold, they thought it was 20 minutes later, and it was an hour and 20 minutes later. And when you're truly focused and you're truly paying attention and you're in the present moment, all of a sudden, you will leave this three-dimensional reality. And when you leave this three-dimensional reality, there's only one other place you go, and that is the realm of thought, and that's called the quantum field. And that quantum field is where all possibilities exist, right? So they were connecting to a field of information that had everything to do with the first principle, which is that invisible intelligence that's both within us and all around us, personal and universal. It is the unifying field that governs everything material in this world. And if you're going to change something material, that means you got to get beyond your body to heal your body.
Right.
Because if you're your body trying to heal your body, there's one thing that we can guarantee: it's going to take time. It's going to just take a long time because you're playing by the rules of Newtonian physics. You play by the rules of quantum physics. Energy dictates matter. So when you're truly in the field and you're making changes there, then the downward cascade, neurologically, biologically, chemically, hormonally, genetically, is the side effect of what's happening in the field.
It accelerates.
It accelerates it, exactly. So you do it in less time because you're more connected to